Girl interrupts. Judge during. Trial what she says. Shocks everyone. A hush fell over the courtroom as the final witness took the stand. Tension buzzed in the air, so thick it felt like a tangible weight pressing down on everyone in attendance. The defendant, eyes hollow and cheeks gaunt, stared at the judge with a desperate, burning hope. Lawyers for both sides shifted uncomfortably, anticipating a showdown that had dominated local headlines for weeks, front-page news, even in the Philadelphia Inquirer. Then, in the midst of the judge's solemn questioning, a small voice rang out from the public benches. A young girl stood trembling, yet determined, interrupting the proceedings. What she said next shook everyone to their core. The clamor outside Philadelphia's imposing criminal justice center had begun hours before dawn. News vans and camera crews jockeyed for prime sidewalk positions, while curious passers-by strained to get a glimpse of the high-profile trial set to commence that day. Inside the corridors, echoed with the usual cacophony of clacking heels, nervous chatter, and the rustle of legal documents. But one case stood out among the docket State versus Brian Sutter, a widely followed lawsuit that spanned allegations of fraud, family betrayal, and possibly even conspiracy. It was rumored that the entire trial revolved around missing funds from a well-known local charity, though deeper, more sinister secrets threatened to be unearthed in the process. As the morning sun bathed the courtroom in cold grey light, Judge Naomi Whitfield presided at the bench. Known for her strict, no-nonsense demeanor, Judge Whitfield had seen countless cases of corruption, theft, and heartbreak in her 15 years on the bench. But something about this particular trial had made her uneasy from the start. Perhaps it was the defendant, Brian Sutter, who sat with a stoic, almost theatrical composure. Or maybe it was the lead prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Lionel McKee, known for pursuing convictions with a level of intensity that made him infamous in Philadelphia's legal community. Yet the strangest aspect was the people who filled the gallery. Brian's wife, Addison Sutter, stoically refused to meet his eyes as she sat behind the prosecution's table, arms folded. The tension between them could not have been more evident. Their wedding bands might as well have been shackles. At Addison's side sat her attorney, the formidable Evangeline Park. Once a prosecutor herself, Park had turned to family law and civil litigation, but the rumor mill hinted at her special connection to the Sutter household. Addison's presence at the prosecution's side, rather than behind the defense table, was a scalding statement of betrayal. Some whispered that Addison believed Brian had used her family's estate to funnel thousands, if not millions of dollars away from a charity for disadvantaged children. It seemed unimaginable that a married couple would be standing on opposite sides of the courtroom, but here they were. Promptly at 9:00 a.m., the gavel struck. "Court is now in session," intoned the bailiff. Brian Sutter stood with an outward calm that verged on arrogance. His neatly combed dark hair and impeccable suit projected an air of confidence, even dignity. He resembled a man walking into an important business meeting, rather than one facing charges that could land him in prison for decades. Judge Whitfield wasted no time. "Mr. Sutter," she said, scanning the defendant over the rim of her glasses. "You are charged with fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy related to the misappropriation of funds from the Philadelphia Children's Restoration Foundation. How do you plead?" Brian's lawyer, a sharp-witted defense attorney named Margaret Gillespie, offered a genteel smile. "My client pleads not guilty, Your Honor." Without glancing up, Judge Whitfield noted the plea in her file. "Very well. We will begin opening statements." Mr. McKee, Assistant DA Lionel McKee, was a tall, austere man with flecks of silver in his hair. Every step he took was purposeful, and his stance exuded unwavering confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began. "Today, you will hear evidence that Mr. Brian Sutter embezzled funds from a foundation meant to help the most vulnerable among us children in our community, who have few resources and fewer protectors. Mr. Sutter took advantage of the trust placed in him by his donors, and for his own personal gain, funneled away hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more. We will prove this beyond a reasonable doubt." He continued for several minutes, outlining the prosecution's plan to present bank statements, witness testimony, and a damning paper trail. But for all his oratorical skill, McKee couldn't hide the tension rippling beneath the surface. Something about this case had a deeper undercurrent, something he had glimpsed in Addison's eyes, and the hush that fell whenever her name was mentioned. When it was Margaret Gillespie's turn, she strode to the jury box with a calm, measured pace. "Members of the jury, you will see that the prosecution's case is built on speculation, incomplete records, and the testimony of individuals with personal vendettas against my client." Her eyes drifted momentarily to Addison, who refused to meet her gaze. "You will see how easy it is to misinterpret financial data and how misguided it can be to assume guilt without the full context. Most importantly, by the end of this trial, you will see that Mr. Brian Sutter is innocent. The delicate dance of the law had officially begun." But beyond the formalities, a nagging undercurrent buzzed through the crowd. Why was Addison Sutter sitting with the prosecution? If Brian were innocent, why was his wife, who had once adored him, so convinced of his guilt that she'd stand against him in a courtroom? The more inquisitive minds in the gallery speculated that Addison had discovered something so devastating that loyalty simply could not overshadow it. At a side bench, a slender young woman named Caroline Evans sipped nervously from a bottle of water, waiting for her turn to testify. Only 19, Caroline had been a volunteer at the Philadelphia Children's Restoration Foundation for the past 3 years. She'd witnessed firsthand the charity's many attempts to expand its outreach, especially into impoverished neighborhoods. She was also rumored to be the last person to see certain crucial financial documents before they vanished. Today, she would be the prosecution's key witness. As the jury sized up both sides, Judge Whitfield signaled for the first witness. Caroline Evans rose, smoothed her trembling hands over her skirt, and approached the stand. "State your name for the record, please," the bailiff said. "Caroline Evans," she replied, voice quivering. As the oath was administered, she glanced at the watchers. Her eyes inadvertently collided with Brian Sutter's. His expression was cold, but she noticed a flicker of something remorse. Fear it disappeared in an instant. She took a deep breath. Her testimony could very well sway the jury, but none of them, Caroline included, had any inkling of the seismic disruption that would soon disrupt the entire trial. A disruption that would come from a most unexpected source, the small, unassuming figure of a girl seated quietly in the back row. While Caroline composed herself in the witness stand, Addison Sutter's mind drifted to the day she first met Brian. It was at a fundraising gala for the Philadelphia Children's Restoration Foundation, an event brimming with donors, city council members, and local celebrities. Brian, with his suave charm and philanthropic ambition, had dazzled her. They danced, shared a conversation about their mutual passion for social causes, and discovered how similarly they viewed the world, or so it seemed. She had been enthralled by his kindness and vision, never imagining that he might one day stand accused of siphoning the very funds they had pledged to protect. Their marriage had blossomed quickly, and Addison was introduced to the philanthropic community as the new Mrs. Sutter. She joined boards, volunteered at events, and helped gather donors for the foundation. But as the months rolled on, Addison began to notice odd discrepancies. Brian was secretive about certain bank accounts, occasionally snapping at her if she wandered too close to the spreadsheets left open on his laptop. When the foundation's manager expressed concern about a missing deposit, Addison initially dismissed it as a clerical error. But each subsequent anomaly chipped away at her faith in Brian's righteousness. Still, her husband's influence and her own optimism blinded her to the harsh truth. There was a pattern of funds vanishing after each major fundraising drive. Then Brian began making lavish purchases, explaining them away as necessary to maintain an image that would attract large donors. Addison tried to quell the unease in her gut, wanting desperately to believe in the man she had married. Back on the witness stand, Caroline recounted how she had helped organize donor lists, cross-check receipts, and coordinate with local businesses that offered sponsorship. I first noticed something was off when the sums we were depositing into the foundation's account never matched the amounts I catalogued, she explained. The faint lilt in her voice betrayed her youth. At first it was just a few discrepancies, maybe $1,000 missing here or there. But it kept happening. McKee offered Caroline a reassuring nod, prompting her to go on. One evening I stayed late to reconcile the accounts, and I came across several large withdrawals. I approached Mr. Sutter about it, but he told me not to worry. He said he'd look into it and that the bank might have made a mistake. Caroline swallowed hard, except the same kind of withdrawal showed up the next month, and the next. Brian Sutter's face remained impassive, but an undercurrent of tension radiated from him. Every eye in the room flicked between him and the young witness. For her part, Addison lowered her head, her knuckles blanching as she gripped the rail in front of her. Ms. Evans McKee continued. Did Mr. Sutter provide any explanation for these repeated withdrawals? He told me it was for expansion projects, financing new buildings, purchasing equipment. But when I tried to verify those expenditures, the records were inconsistent or missing. The jury seemed spellbound. The methodical unraveling of Brian Sutter's alleged scheme was underway, and Caroline Evans was delivering a damning narrative. Still, though something about Caroline's shaky voice hinted at deeper, unspoken anxieties. Defense attorney Margaret Gillespie wasted no time in her cross-examination. Ms. Evans, you said you noticed discrepancies. Did you personally have access to all of the Foundation's financial accounts? Caroline shook her head. Not all. I only had regular access to the main operating account. So you never saw how Mr. Sutter or the board of directors allocated separate funds. Correct? Maybe there was another legitimate account for expansions. Caroline hesitated. Not directly. But I spoke with the board's treasurer, and he told me the expansions weren't funded yet. We didn't have the revenue. Margaret Gillespie pressed. Did you keep copies of these suspicious transactions? Caroline frowned. I tried to, but the documents I printed mysteriously disappeared from my desk. My digital copies. Her voice caught. They vanished from my folder. Brian's expression tightened, but he remained outwardly calm. Addison, on the other hand, was fighting back tears. She recalled the day she had confronted him about the missing documents, how he had insisted it was just a glitch or a burglary. She remembered lying awake at night, unable to shake the feeling that Brian was hiding something from her. No one in that courtroom was prepared for the voice that would soon break the tension, a voice belonging to a girl in the back row who had slipped in just after the lunch recess. Small and unassuming, she waited silent and pensive, scanning the room. She was perhaps 11 or 12, wearing a simple dress and clutching a threadbare folder. Her eyes flickered over Brian Addison, then the prosecutors, as if searching for the right moment to speak. For the moment she waited, letting the trial's slow grind unfold. As the day's testimony wore on, lawyers debated the finer points of the financial records. Addison stepped out once, unable to keep her composure, quietly sobbing in the hallway, while her attorney comforted her. The heartbreak was palpable. She still wore her wedding ring, though she had often contemplated removing it. Some intangible loyalty still anchored her even as her moral compass insisted she do the right thing. When court adjourned for the day, the gallery stirred with murmured discussions. Journalists from the Philadelphia Inquirer interviewed attorneys and tried to corner Addison, who slipped away through a side door. Brian's posture remained ramrod straight as he conferred with Margaret Gillespie. He was indicted, but not yet convicted, and in his mind there was always a way to manipulate the narrative. Caroline, relieved her part in the day's hearing was done, left the stand exhausted. As she gathered her belongings, she noticed the young girl in the back row silently observing. Their eyes met for an instant, and Caroline saw something in the girl's gaze. Determination, maybe even sympathy. Then the girl rose, crossing toward Caroline with small, measured steps. "Excuse me," the girl whispered, voice tremoring with nerves. "Are you Miss Evans?" Caroline nodded hesitantly. "Yes." "Can I help you?" The girl glanced around, as if worried someone might overhear. "I need to talk to the judge. It's really important." Caroline blinked. "You want to talk to the judge?" "Why?" "Because I know something about Mr. Sutter. It's about the money. Some of it was used for something else. Something bad." Before Caroline could press her further, the bailiff ushered them toward the exit. "Court is done for today," he said. "You'll have to come back tomorrow." Caroline looked down at the girl, who gripped her threadbare folder tightly. "What's your name?" The girl glanced at the floor, apprehensive. "My name is Eva." "Eva, do you have parents here with you?" Caroline asked gently. Eva shook her head, eyes filling with tears. "No." Caroline's heart wrenched. "All right. Maybe tomorrow we can see if the judge will hear you out. But you have to come with an adult." "Okay." Eva swallowed hard, but nodded. As she parted ways with Caroline, no one imagined that this small child possessed a secret so potent it could topple a carefully orchestrated defense, and that her moment to speak would come sooner and more dramatically than anyone expected. The next morning, Addison Sutter awoke in the small studio apartment she had rented just 2 weeks prior after filing for legal separation. She stood at the window looking down at the bustling city street traffic humming below. Though the day's significance loomed large, she would be called to the stand to testify against her own husband. Her mind drifted to the simpler times, breakfasts over the Sunday paper, romantic dinners discussing philanthropic visions, volunteering hand in hand at the Foundation's children's events. She remembered Brian's laughter, how easily he could light up a room, and the way he'd champion the cause of underprivileged kids with a zeal that seemed so genuine. But those memories clashed violently with the man she had come to know. The man who locked himself in the study for hours on end. The man whose explanations for missing charity money never made sense. The man who Addison had come to believe valued greed over integrity. And so, with a tired sigh, she prepared herself for the day's ordeal. At the courthouse, reporters swarmed once again. Addison kept her head down, ignoring the barrage of questions. She could barely process her own internal turmoil, let alone deliver sound bites to the media. Inside the courtroom was filling up quickly, and Addison took her seat beside her attorney Evangeline Park, a compassionate but firm presence who had become Addison's closest confidant. Today, the prosecution planned to call Addison as a witness. She dreaded it. But if testifying could expose Brian's misdeeds and perhaps help the children who'd been robbed, then Addison knew she had no choice. As the bailiff signaled for everyone to rise, Judge Whitfield entered and took her seat at the bench. Brian and Margaret Gillespie stood at the defense table exchanging hushed words. Brian locked eyes with Addison briefly, face impassive. Addison felt her heart jolt, recalling the love she once had for the man behind those eyes. She forced herself to look away. The first witness of the day was the Foundation's lead accountant, who methodically testified about the consistent shortfalls in donations. Some money never made it to the bank at all. Other times there were large withdrawals that appeared to vanish into thin air. The jury listened raptly. Then the clerk called Addison Sutter to the stand. She walked up slowly, hands clammy. After being sworn in, Addison composed herself. McKee approached. "Mrs. Sutter, can you describe for the court how finances were handled at home? Did your husband, Mr. Brian Sutter, share details about his business dealings?" She inhaled deeply. "Initially, yes. He'd show me financial statements and discuss expansions for the foundation. But over time, he became more secretive. If I questioned him about discrepancies, he'd insist he had it under control or that I didn't understand the complexities of running a charity." "How did this secrecy affect your marriage?" McKee asked. Addison looked down at her folded hands. It created distance between us. I began to suspect he was lying about something. Eventually, I discovered documents on his laptop bank transfers to an offshore account. When I confronted him, he became angry and accused me of not trusting him." McKee nodded. "Were you able to confirm where those funds came from?" Tears welled in Addison's eyes. "Yes, they were from the Foundation's main account. Money that donors had entrusted to us to help children in need." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Brian tightened his jaw, refusing to look at Addison. Some jurors exchanged glances, their expressions reflecting dawning skepticism toward the defense's claims. "And what did Mr. Sutter say about these transfers?" McKee pressed. "He said it was a long-term investment strategy, that we'd eventually bring the money back. But it never returned. He insisted we needed to maintain a certain image, and these funds were helping him secure bigger donations down the line. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't." McKee offered a sympathetic nod before concluding, "Thank you, Mrs. Sutter." Margaret Gillespie stood up, ready for cross-examination. "Mrs. Sutter, you mentioned you found these documents on your husband's laptop. Is it possible you misunderstood them, or that the funds were earmarked for a legitimate project you weren't aware of?" Addison squared her shoulders. "I considered that possibility, but after I confronted him, he deleted the files. If they were legitimate, why hide them like that?" Margaret's expression remained neutral. "Could there be another explanation? Perhaps your husband wanted to keep the project details confidential until the Foundation's board approved them." Trembling but resolute, Addison replied, "I asked the board members myself. They had no knowledge of such a project. No expansions were approved. These were secret accounts, and he funneled large sums out of the country. That's not standard procedure for any legitimate charitable operation." Margaret paced, scanning her notes. "Mrs. Sutter, you stand to gain financially from this legal separation and potential divorce, do you not? If your husband is convicted, you may secure a significant portion of shared assets." Addison's eyes flashed with fury. I want nothing from Brian. I only want the truth to come out, and for the children he robbed to get what they deserve." Her voice broke, tears streaming down her cheeks. "All of this has destroyed my family and my heart." Before Margaret could continue, a sudden commotion in the back of the courtroom drew every gaze. The door opened, and in stepped Eva, the young girl from the day before. She clutched her threadbare folder, cheeks flushed. A bailiff tried to stop her from approaching the bar, but with surprising resolve, Eva dodged around him. "Wait," she cried out, her small voice ringing through the hushed space. "Please, Your Honor. I need to talk to you. It's about Mr. Sutter." All eyes pivoted toward the child. Judge Whitfield, startled, rapped her gavel. "Order, bailiff, please." "Let her speak," Addison murmured, voice trembling, though not loud enough to override the chaos. Brian's complexion paled. His eyes snapped from Addison to Eva, a flicker of recognition crossing his face, an expression that didn't go unnoticed by the gallery. Margaret Gillespie leaned toward him, whispering something urgently. The bailiff finally escorted Eva to the front, apologizing profusely to the judge. Judge Whitfield fixed the trembling child with a stern but not unkind gaze. "Young lady, we do not allow disruptions in court. Who are you, and do you have an attorney or guardian present?" Eva's eyes brimmed with tears as she stared up at the judge. "I'm Eva Johnson. I don't have a guardian here. But I have proof that Mr. Sutter hurt my family. Please, Your Honor. My dad worked for him. He said the money would help us. Then my dad got arrested because of some checks. We lost our home. My mum died, and now I don't have anyone. Please let me show you what I have." A wave of stunned silence rippled through the courtroom. Journalists scrambled to note every detail, sensing a bombshell. Judge Whitfield's demeanor softened as she studied the child. "Bailiff, please escort Ms. Johnson to counsel. We will take a short recess to determine if this evidence is admissible." The gavel struck. Everyone rose, buzzing with anticipation. Addison, tears still in her eyes, gazed at Brian. He looked away, jaw clenched. Clearly, Eva's unexpected appearance threatened to blow open the carefully orchestrated defense, and Addison couldn't help but wonder what tangled web had Brian woven that dragged this child into the fray. 15 minutes later, the court resumed. Eva now seated to the side with an appointed guardian. Ad litem, a court-appointed child advocate, gripped her folder as if it were a life raft. Judge Whitfield addressed the courtroom. "We have briefly reviewed the materials Miss Johnson presented. While unusual, the court has determined that the child's statements warrant consideration. However, due to her age and the sensitive nature of the content, I will allow her to provide a limited testimony with the understanding that she will be treated as any other witness." Objections. Margaret Gillespie rose, measured but firm. Defense objects. The child is unrepresented, and this is highly irregular. We have no notice or ability to prepare. Prosecutor McKee stood as well. "Your Honor, if Miss Johnson's testimony directly implicates the defendant's actions, the people have a right to hear it. We can address issues of foundation and reliability through cross-examination." Judge Whitfield nodded. "Objection noted. In the interest of justice, I'm allowing her testimony. Let's proceed carefully." Eva approached the witness stand short enough that the bailiff had to adjust the microphone. She was sworn in, voice quavering as she promised to tell the truth. The guardian ad litem, Ms. Hawkins, stood nearby, ready to assist if needed. McKee proceeded. "Eva, can you tell us how you know Mr. Sutter?" She clutched the folder. My dad, James Johnson, worked with him. Dad was hired to oversee some finances for the foundation. He was really excited because the pay was good, and he thought he could help kids. Then Mr. Sutter started giving Dad these checks to deposit into different accounts. Dad said it was for expansions too. But then Dad got in trouble because those accounts were in his name. He got arrested for fraud. And Mr. Sutter, he stopped returning our calls. Tension crackled in the courtroom. The narrative matched Addison's claims of secret accounts, but with a new dimension, scapegoats to take the fall. McKee gently continued, "Eva, what happened to your father?" She breathed shakily. "He's in prison. He told me once when I visited him that Mr. Sutter made him sign papers he didn't understand. Daddy thought it was all for the foundation. But then everything fell apart. My mum, she got really sick and we didn't have money. She died last month." A wave of sympathy rippled through the gallery. Some jurors' eyes welled with tears. Addison placed a hand over her mouth, horrified at the magnitude of Brian's alleged betrayal. "I'm so sorry," Eva McKee said softly. "Is there something in your folder you'd like to show the court?" Eva nodded, opening it with unsteady hands. She pulled out a small stack of documents, carefully handing them to Ms. Hawkins, who then passed them to McKee. McKee flipped through them, his eyebrows shooting up in surprise. He walked to the bench, offering them to Judge Whitfield. "Your Honor, these appear to be copies of bank transfers and emails, some referencing offshore investment accounts. They also include instructions allegedly signed by Mr. Sutter ordering Mr. Johnson to deposit funds. We'd like to enter them into evidence." Margaret Gillespie bristled, scanning the documents and whispering urgently to Brian, who maintained a stony silence. Judge Whitfield studied the papers. "These documents will need to be authenticated, but for now they are admitted provisionally." With that, McKee turned back to Eva. "Eva, can you tell us how you obtained these?" The girl bit her lip. "When Dad got arrested, he hid them in my room. He said if anything happened to him, I should keep them safe because they were the only proof he had that he was told to do all those deposits." McKee nodded. "Thank you, Eva. Now, can you confirm whether you've shown these documents to anyone else, like the police or a lawyer?" She shook her head. "No, I didn't know how. Mom was sick and I was scared. But after Mom died, I found them again, and I saw that Mr. Sutter was on trial. So I came here." A hush settled over the courtroom. Here was a child, orphaned and alone, risking everything to stand against a man of considerable power. For Addison, the heartbreak was immeasurable. She knew how Brian's persuasive personality could manipulate those who trusted him. But this felt like a new low. Now it was Margaret Gillespie's turn. She approached Eva cautiously. "Eva, you said your dad was in charge of depositing checks. Is it possible he forged Mr. Sutter's signature or misunderstood instructions?" Eva frowned. "My dad wouldn't do that. He believed he was doing what Mr. Sutter wanted him to do. Mr. Sutter used to come to our house for dinner sometimes. He promised my dad promotions and bonuses." Margaret paused. "I understand. But the checks, do you know for certain that they were supposed to be for expansions? Or is that just what your dad told you?" Eva looked at her defiantly. "I heard Mr. Sutter say it. He sat in our kitchen and told Dad to move money around so the foundation wouldn't have to pay taxes on big donations yet. He said it was all for expansions. But it didn't look right to me. My dad was worried too, but he needed a job." A pained expression crossed Margaret's face. Cross-examining a child witness was always precarious. She shifted tactics. "Eva, You said your mother died of an illness. I'm very sorry for your loss. You must be very upset, and it's understandable you might blame someone for not helping. Eva's lip trembled. I'm not blaming him just because my mum died. I blame him because he lied to my dad, and we ended up losing everything. Margaret pursed her lips. No further questions. McKee offered Eva a soft smile. Thank you, Eva. No more questions, Your Honor. Eva stepped down, guided by Ms. Hawkins. She cast one final glance toward Brian Sutter. He wouldn't meet her gaze. The entire courtroom seemed to be in collective shock at how far-reaching Brian's alleged corruption went, and how easily he may have sacrificed others to keep his own hands seemingly clean. But while Eva's testimony had rattled everyone, the biggest shock was yet to come. A shock that would hinge on one final piece of evidence, a bombshell that Addison had never dared speak of publicly. Because while Eva's revelations painted a damning picture, Addison held the key to a hidden puzzle. The reason why Brian had truly funneled the charity's money away. And once that reason was disclosed, it would make sense of everything: Brian's arrogance, his secrecy, and even the depths of his betrayal. Following Eva's emotional testimony, Judge Whitfield declared a lunch recess. The tension in the room was palpable. Jurors tried their best not to discuss the case among themselves while heading to the cafeteria, but they couldn't help exchanging uneasy glances. Reporters frantically dictated stories to their editors. Addison made her way out, flanked by her attorney and a few curious journalists peppering her with questions she refused to answer. For a moment, Addison found refuge in a small conference room away from the clamor of the courthouse. Evangeline Park stood at her side, concern etched across her face. "Addison," she said softly. "Are you okay?" Struggling to keep her composure. Addison nodded. "That poor girl. I can't believe Brian would do that to her family." Evangeline inhaled deeply. If what Eva said is true, Brian may have orchestrated the deposit scheme to keep his own name off the suspicious transfers, leaving subordinates like James Johnson to take the blame. But we still need to prove it definitively. Addison sank into a chair, exhaustion overtaking her. "I don't want to think about what else Brian's done that I don't know about." Evangeline gazed at her, solemnly. "You're going to have to think about it if we're going to hold him accountable. There's also something you haven't shared yet, isn't there?" Addison's breath caught. Indeed, she harbored a secret so incendiary she'd prayed it would never see the light of day. It involved private transactions, hush payments to a dangerous crowd, proof that Brian had leveraged the charity's funds for personal illicit gains that went beyond mere fraud. "I can't. It's too big," Addison whispered, tears stinging her eyes. Evangeline's tone was gentle but firm. "Addison, these children that the charity was supposed to help, these good people losing their jobs like Eva's father, don't they deserve the full truth? If Brian has ties to something bigger, the prosecution should know. It could ensure he's held accountable for everything." Addison closed her eyes. In the swirling vortex of her mind, she recalled the night Brian came home late, reeking of whiskey and sweat. His shirt was torn, and on the back of his hand, a deep bruise was forming. He'd mumbled something about uncooperative partners. She'd found a cryptic note in his coat pocket, referencing a wire transfer to a name she didn't recognize. Later, she discovered ties to a known criminal syndicate. Fear had paralyzed her, then terrified that if she exposed him, those criminals might come for both of them, or worse, for the children of the Foundation. But that was before everything fell apart, before countless innocents suffered. Addison swallowed hard. Maybe Evangeline was right. Maybe the only way to break this cycle of lies was full disclosure. "Okay," she murmured. "I'll do it." Evangeline squeezed Addison's hand. "We'll talk to McKee. We need to go through the proper channels." Outside the conference room, they found the corridor abuzz. A throng of journalists parted just enough to reveal a tall figure in a pristine suit, impeccably styled hair, Brian Sutter. He stood with Margaret Gillespie, his gaze locked on Addison. "There she is," Brian muttered, taking a step forward. His attorney tried to restrain him, but he brushed her off. "Addison," he called, voice echoing. Onlookers held their breath. Evangeline held up a warning hand. "Don't come any closer. Anything you say could be used against you or my client." Brian ignored her eyes, fixed on Addison. "We need to talk. Alone." Addison forced a bitter laugh. "What else could you possibly have to say to me?" He lowered his voice, stepping closer, heedless of the cameras clicking. "Whatever you think you know, it's not what it seems. Let me fix this." "Fix it," Addison replied, incredulity dripping from her voice. "What about Eva's father? Did you fix that situation too? Or just discard it, like all the other obstacles in your grand scheme?" Brian's eyes flickered, and he stepped back, pressing his lips into a thin line. He cast a disdainful glare at the journalists gathered around. "I see you've made up your mind," he said coldly. "I hope you realize what you're doing." Addison refused to speak further. Evangeline ushered her away, heading to the cafeteria, leaving Brian behind with a swarm of reporters. Addison felt like she was trembling inside, but she was resolved. Brian might threaten, manipulate, or beg for mercy, but she wouldn't be swayed. Not this time. That afternoon, the court reconvened. Tension crackled like static in the air, fueled by the emotional fervor of Eva's testimony and the swirling rumors that Addison might have more secrets to reveal. Judge Whitfield took her seat. "We will continue with the prosecution's witnesses. Mr. Heptil, McKee, your next witness." McKee cleared his throat. "The people call Addison Sutter for additional testimony." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Addison stood again, taking the stand. She glanced at Brian. The chill in his eyes told her he was prepared to see her as a traitor. Heart-pounding, Addison placed a hand on the rail and steeled herself. This was it. Mrs. Sutter McKee began. "I understand you have additional information regarding Mr. Sutter's activities that extends beyond what you previously testified to. Is that correct?" "Yes," she answered, voice tight. She felt the weight of the entire courtroom upon her. "Please explain," McKee said gently. Addison exhaled, mustering courage. "A few months before I filed for separation, I found evidence of wire transfers to a shell corporation called Crown Vista Holdings, which from my research appeared to be connected to a criminal syndicate specializing in money laundering. At first I thought it was just another of Brian's expansions. But then I realized the amounts being funneled out were far larger than any philanthropic endeavor required." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Even the judge leaned forward. "Do you have documentation to back up this claim?" McKee pressed. "I do," Addison replied, reaching into a portfolio and retrieving several papers. "These are copies of the wire transfers emails and one contract I intercepted on his email account. The contract mentioned additional services provided in exchange for a cut of the charity's donations. McKee accepted the documents, scanning them with growing astonishment. Your Honor, we ask that these documents be admitted into evidence. Margaret Gillespie stood, face flushed. Objection. This is speculation, not fact. My client denies any association with this alleged syndicate. Judge Whitfield examined the documents. I will allow these documents to be admitted provisionally pending verification of authenticity. Overruled. Silence thickened in the room as McKee continued. Mrs. Sutter, based on these materials, do you believe the defendant was engaged in money laundering in addition to defrauding the charity? Addison glanced at Brian, voice trembling. Yes, I believe so. He seemed to have partnered with very dangerous individuals, people who would invest or hide the stolen charity money in ways that could never be traced back to him. A hush settled over the gallery. Brian's face was now a mask of anger and fear. One of the reporters from the Philadelphia Inquirer scribbled notes frantically recognizing a front-page scandal in the making. Margaret Gillespie attempted to salvage the moment during cross-examination. Mrs. Sutter, how can you be sure these wire transfers were not legitimate business expenses for partnerships abroad? Addison steeled herself. Because there were email exchanges explicitly mentioning the need to disguise donation sources to avoid suspicion. That's money laundering, Miss Gillespie. Margaret's lip curled slightly. Let's be clear, you're not a legal or financial expert. Could you have misinterpreted jargon? Addison shook her head. I have enough experience from my time volunteering at the Foundation to know the difference between legitimate transactions and laundering. Also, the contract refers to illicit activities and demands hush payments if certain deliveries aren't made. That's not standard philanthropic jargon. Margaret hesitated. No further questions. Judge Whitfield dismissed Addison, and she returned to her seat, tears burning behind her eyes. She had finally exposed the darkest corner of Brian's empire. Whatever happened next, there was no turning back. In the following days, a storm of revelations and evidence rained down on Brian Sutter. Forensic accountants corroborated Addison's documents. Eva's father, James Johnson, testified via video call from prison, tearfully describing how he believed he was following legitimate instructions only to be framed as a fall guy. More employees of the Foundation came forward, detailing suspicious instructions from Brian. The prosecution's narrative of a cold, calculating scheme to defraud a children's charity while laundering money for criminal interests was shaping up with alarming clarity. Brian's demeanor soured, and his once well-tailored suits seemed to hang awkwardly on his stiff frame. The press had a field day, painting him as a monster of greed. Addison, for her part, felt no satisfaction, only a numb sadness for the future she had lost, and the betrayal that had shattered her illusions. When the defense presented its case, it relied on the argument that Brian Sutter was merely an ambitious philanthropist with legitimate business ties abroad, and that any discrepancies were the result of incompetent staff or third-party mishandlings. But for every explanation, the prosecution countered with reams of data and a parade of witnesses, including Addison Caroline and Eva, whose heartfelt pleas struck deep chords within the jury. By the final day of testimony, the tension in the courtroom was electric. Both sides gave closing arguments. McKee painted Brian as a cunning manipulator who preyed on public goodwill using unsuspecting subordinates to disguise illegal transactions. Margaret Gillespie argued that the prosecution had overreached, turning normal charity procedures into sinister conspiracies, and that Brian was the victim of betrayal by those closest to him. Yet the jury's faces betrayed a collective skepticism. They seemed unconvinced that all these people, Addison, Eva, multiple Foundation employees, would conspire to fabricate such elaborate lies. Finally, the day of the verdict arrived. The courthouse brimmed with tension. Photographers clicked away, capturing Addison's drawn face and Eva's anxious fidgeting. Brian maintained a last vestige of composure, but flecks of sweat dotted his forehead. The jury filed into the box. Judge Whitfield turned to the foreperson. "Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, stood. "We have, Your Honor. In the matter of the State versus Brian Sutter on the charge of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of money laundering, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy, we find the defendant guilty." A hush of stunned silence filled the courtroom, followed by an explosion of noise. Cameras flashed. Reporters scrambled. Brian stood there stricken. Margaret Gillespie placed a hand on his shoulder, whispering words lost in the chaos. Addison let out a shuddering breath. The relief she felt was tempered by sorrow for what might have been for the love she had once held for this man. Order in the court. Judge Whitfield called. Slowly the chatter subsided. She looked at Brian, her expression grave. "Brian Sutter, you have been found guilty on all counts. Sentencing will be scheduled in 1 month. Until then, you will be remanded into custody without bail." For Brian, there was no more facade of confidence. He stared at Addison, a swirl of anger and desperation in his eyes. But Addison refused to look away. She stood, shoulders squared, feeling the weight of finality settle over her. As the bailiff escorted Brian out, Eva rose from her seat, tears slipping down her cheeks. The man who had devastated her family was going to face justice. A wave of conflicting emotions. Relief, sadness, anger washed over her. She felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. It was Caroline Evans, offering a reassuring squeeze. They had both played a part in unveiling the truth, ensuring the man who exploited vulnerable children and families would no longer be able to hide. Yet the final stroke of karma had one more twist to deliver. Outside the courthouse, as Brian was led away in handcuffs, a swarm of reporters and onlookers parted for a group of federal agents. They stepped forward, handing additional warrants to the local police. Word spread like wildfire. Brian Sutter was now under federal investigation for racketeering and collusion with organized crime. His nightmare had only begun. Outside, Addison found Eva by the steps, hugging that tattered folder. Addison knelt beside her. "Eva, are you okay?" Eva wiped her tears. "I guess. I miss my dad and my mom. I wish things were different." Addison's own voice trembled. "I'm so sorry for everything you've lost. You were so brave to come here." "Thanks to you, Brian can't hurt anyone else." Eva nodded, hugging Addison. The city's traffic whirred around them, life moving on. Addison felt an odd mixture of relief and grief, but she also sensed a new beginning for her, for Eva. For the children, the Foundation was meant to help. Word spread quickly that Brian Sutter had been delivered a decisive blow by the justice system, and the punishment that followed was severe. At his sentencing hearing a month later, the judge admonished him for his calculated betrayal of public trust and vulnerable children. She handed down consecutive prison terms, ensuring that Brian would spend a substantial portion of his life behind bars. The federal charges only deepened his plight. indictments piled up for tax evasion, racketeering, and conspiracy with known mob affiliates. Investigations revealed that he had used the foundation as a cover to launder money for a web of illicit enterprises. The weight of the evidence was insurmountable. Brian had once been a respected figure in Philadelphia's philanthropic circles, but his fall from grace was absolute. He would become a cautionary tale nationwide, the man who plundered a children's charity for personal gain and entangled himself with criminals only to face the unflinching hammer of justice. Meanwhile, the Philadelphia Children's Restoration Foundation underwent a major overhaul with new leadership and renewed oversight. Donations poured in once the scandal made headlines. People outraged by Brian Sutter's actions wanted to ensure the charity's real mission persevered. Ava's father was released early from prison, his conviction overturned on account of Brian's manipulation. Though Eva's mother was gone, at least father and daughter had a chance to rebuild their lives together. As for Addison, she quietly ended her marriage through divorce, finalizing any last legal ties. She chose to remain in Philadelphia, dedicating her time to the foundation's renaissance, providing insight into how to keep finances transparent and donors informed. She and Ava kept in touch. Addison even offered to mentor the girl, assisting her father in finding stable work. Both recognized that the heartbreak they endured forged a bond, an unlikely friendship born from the rubble of Brian's deceptions. In the end, the shock and drama that exploded in that courtroom would be remembered for years to come. People whispered about the day the little girl's voice interrupted a powerful judge, unraveling a man's carefully constructed empire of lies. And they would recall how, in the end, karma struck with a vengeance, ensuring that Brian Sutter's monstrous betrayal did not go unanswered. Justice prevailed, and those who dared to expose the truth, no matter how small or unassuming, stood victorious. Thank you for experiencing this gripping tale of betrayal, courage, and ultimate justice. Brian Sutter's story reminds us that sometimes the people we trust most can hide the darkest secrets, and even the smallest among us. A brave little girl can tip the scales of justice. From Addison's heartbreak to Eva's unwavering resolve, every character played a pivotal role in exposing lies that threatened to swallow a children's charity in darkness. If you found yourself swept away by this dramatic courtroom saga, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you'll help us continue to bring you more stories of resilience, hope, and the power of truth. Thank you for tuning in. And remember, justice might be slow, but when it finally arrives, it delivers a lesson we won't soon forget. Stay vigilant, stay inspired, and we'll see you next time.